Well, now we come to one of my favorite portions of any service, really, at our UUCM church, a tapestry service, which means we're bringing together a number of elements together to create a fabric that, in this case, will help us understand and appreciate the depth of experience and emotion that accompanied this last 16 months of pandemic. We will have presentations by 4 of our members and members from the community experiencing a tapestry, hearing what it was like for each of them. Please welcome, first of all, Susan Merrill.
Plague Days, February 12th, 2020. I told Will I wish they wouldn't keep using the word pandemic. It just means the virus is in various parts of the world and it's panicking people. March 4, Jordan canceled our choir practice late on Wednesday afternoon. I'm disappointed feeling this may be premature. Can't we still rehearse? March 19, day 1 of the quarantine. I am working my 2-1-1 shift when Governor Newsom announced the stay-at-home order. My phone doesn't stop ringing for the next 4 hours. One of my first calls is from a man who wants to know if his cigarette shop is an essential business. I tell him it's not on the list, but I thought, what a bad time for smokers to have to go cold turkey. I go over the 2 hours management wants us to keep our call time to. I don't care. This is not a night for just information and referrals. March 22, day 4. Our first Zoom service, a complete joy. What a blessing technology is at this time. Reverend Kevin looked like a movie star and happy tears all around as we chatted. March 22, April 10, day 22. I found toilet paper on Amazon, 12 rolls that could get to me in a month. Then I read a review that said, this TP is like John Wayne, rough, tough, and doesn't take blank off of anyone. Order canceled. Day 31, May 31, day 77. Today's service addressed the horrendous, inexcusable murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis. As the protesting began, Trump quoted George Wallace, when the looting starts, the shooting starts. So many of us in despair. June 11th, day 83. This afternoon, we began the Vote Forward project with a Zoom-in organized by Rain, with Rev Kev serenading us on the piano. My handwriting looks like a person's who isn't old enough to vote. August 3, day 128. I started inserting COVID stats taken from the Nevada County website. 312 cases, 1 death. For balance, I add pretty pictures, funny cartoons, and photos, including one of Andrew with his new girlfriend, a dark-haired Cuban Sicilian beauty. September 4, day 170. Jordan began choir practice on Zoom, and I'm filled with joy. We are a tiny but mighty group, Janet soprano, Claire and Michael tenor, Chuck bass, and Kate and I rounding out the altos. November 2, day 222. I woke up anxious and in the most despair I've felt since the country shut down. I miss my friends, family, and the election is tomorrow. What will I do if Trump is reelected? What will our country do? November 17th, day 238. 688 cases, 9 deaths. One day after my visit to Shree and Point Richmond, the state moves from orange to purple. December 4th, day 248. My birthday, many cards and calls from friends and family. 5 days later, the choir will sing Happy Birthday to me, unmuted, a wonderful cacophony. December 24th, day 249. Day 64. 2,415 cases, 44 deaths. The Teddy Bear Christmas service is adorable, with the nativity story acted out by stuffed animals and read by Rain, Lindsay, and Gail. Many of us held our own stuffed animals, and this hard month is almost over. Day 6, 273. 2021. The day of horror and disbelief began as, encouraged by Trump, thousands of his minions stormed the Capitol in an effort to stop the certification. At 3:56 a.m. the next morning, Biden was certified as president-elect and Kamala Harris as VP-elect. How much longer will our democracy be threatened? March 5, day 33. Back to Sacramento for my second shot. A sign at the check-in said, "You are almost through," and balloons at the exit with another sign saying, "Congratulations, you're done. Yay." April 14th, day 389. My little sister Lori and her family arrived from San Diego. They were traveling in their RV on a mountain bike tour of Northern California. We were all vaccinated and ate dinner outside. I am delirious with happiness. June 15th, day 506, 4,892 cases, 75 deaths. The mask came off in California. I am reluctant to go into public spaces without it. I wondered how many people felt the same way. July 6th, day 529. Chuck asked me if I'd write and read something for Sunday's service on July 25th. My reflections on this pandemic year and how we've changed both personally and as a community. I said I could read some of Plague Days, but it was not finished, nor reflective, nor come to any conclusions. Early in the year, my sister Sandra had asked if I will share this over 359-page journal with anyone. I hadn't read it nor edited it and had no plans to do so. Maybe Chuck's invitation was a sign that I should begin. July 12th, day 235, 5,032 cases, 75 deaths. We walked to Memorial Park, and near the parking lot, a sleek gunmetal T-bird cruised by looking like an asphalt submarine. The young man driving had the top down, and Begin the Beguine was playing. It was a pure moment of bliss and the start of another good day. To be continued.
Back to normal. As we got ready for the end of the pandemics, the cry was, at last, back to normal. Personally, I was not interested in a return to normal and began to think about what I would like to have happen. Of course, there is no return to normal. From my experience, when times are really challenging, we are called at those times to evolve, to change, and to stretch. Years ago, a very dear friend of mine announced, "We are not evolved enough yet." I thought, well, that's an interesting comment. Lately, when another friend said the very exact same thing, I thought, maybe it's part of the answer. We do not understand our impact on the world and all of its inhabitants. Before the Memorial Day weekend, I read, the last time there was this much carbon monoxide in the atmosphere was 6 million years ago. During the same time, I also read that scientists are predicting that we have 6 years left before the planet will be unlivable. Now, I cannot verify the truth of either statement. I can only verify the impact on me. 25 years ago, I went back to Holy Names College in Oakland to work on my master's in culture, creation, spirituality. One of the classes I took was from Dr. Brian Swim, a man I still deeply admire. Dr. Swim talked in these classes about his own despair 25 years ago and what was happening to the earth and how depressed he would get. I now often join him in my own heart and mind. Memorial weekend, I watched the traffic on almost every available road and airplane take off everywhere, and people celebrating being back to normal. My heart hurt, and I could not help but cry. And of course, like I do every time, I thought about Dr. Brian Swim, who made this crisis real for me. I would like to quote Gus Speth, the founder of the National Resource Defense Council, from the book, The Immortality Key. He said, I used to think that the top environmental problems facing the world were global warming, environmental degradation, and ecosystem collapse, and that we science could fix these problems with enough science. But I was wrong. The real problem is not these three things, but greed, selfishness, and cultural and apathy. And for that, we need a spiritual and cultural transformation. And we scientists do not know how to do that. I decide supporting our evolution of the species may be the answer. In the same book I mentioned, I discovered that either 300 or 400 AD, the Christian church declared that white humans were chosen by God. Made me aware of how little we have evolved in our capacity to love, have compassion, and be inclusive. I think sometimes it lives in our DNA, our fear of what is different from us. Our capacity for diversity, love, and compassion, and most importantly, inclusion, is where we need to evolve, to be developed, so we can understand our impact on all the inhabitants of the earth and maybe the universe. How do we encourage in ourselves the capacity to love, to accept differences, and to become active participants in the practice? Sometimes I wonder, do we personally know what compassion feels like in our bodies? Do we remember that we're not capable of being compassionate to others when we neglect being compassionate to ourselves? In early cultures, since the beginning of time, humans have sat in circles around a fire and shared their stories. The idea to build a compassionate, loving world by telling our stories is really my passion. Since I've never heard a story, I cannot relate to some part of it and appreciate the teller, love them more, and find a reason for compassion and inclusion. Hopefully, hoping it will spread. Do I do any of these things well as I would like? No, I don't. I just keep practicing on myself and others, hoping to improve my own capacity for compassion and inclusion. And now you've heard a piece of my story. Thank you very much for listening.
Well, thanks to Ruth for laying down the gauntlet for scientists to seeing what happens. The pandemic actually reminded me of when I was a kid growing up in Pennsylvania. My parents took me swimming, a regular outing on steamy summer days. One day there was no more swimming, and it stayed that way for years. I didn't understand then, but I came to know it was polio. Polio permanently crippled many people in my world then, but closing swimming pools and warning against unofficial swimming holes saved many from the scourge. I feel that it was my mother who saved me by heeding the warnings that she heard. Today, we the people have had many different feelings about the pandemic. My feelings quickly turned to thoughts, however, about how to support loved ones, friends, and community in doing the best we could. It all seems unreal in retrospect, but my career as a scientist led me to a profound appreciation of the science that created the COVID vaccines. I was proud of the Herculean effort in labs around the world to harness the fundamental forces of life, like messenger RNA, and create a practical vaccine that could be delivered to hundreds of millions of people. I was heartened at the huge pharmaceutical companies, not often viewed as our friends, but in this case, they created a product almost overnight that could be moved through an incredibly sophisticated delivery system. I remember the government not asking, how much does this cost? But rather, how much do you need? It felt like the system was there to save our lives. And so is the medical community. While the first responders and caregivers made untold sacrifices, I was in disbelief by the nonstop media coverage. Perhaps it was my skepticism that made it seem unreal. My reaction was, are you serious? There are actually portable morgues outside hospitals? There were. I did appreciate the media as it tried valiantly to help us understand what rarely reaches outside the scientific community. I knew scientists were testing hypotheses, which meant this may or may not work, but we'll test it as much as feasible to find out. I was troubled by the demands for absolute certainty. While many wanted answers, I was frustrated that hypotheses about what would reduce contagion, like masks, washing hands, restricting social activity, were challenged because they weren't certain to stop the pandemic and certainly were disruptive of regular life. For now, I think that science has prevailed because fewer of us are getting COVID. I hope we will continue to win against viruses. These novel forms of semi-life have achieved a new level of existence and will mutate again. May we all embrace science as our defense. It is fundamental to our survival.
I picked up another square nail in the yard yesterday. Someone, a blacksmith, a miner, made this nail by hand some 140 years ago, and his craft outlasted him. I wonder what other things he made by hand and fire here in the foothills, the gold rush not quite behind him, what stories he might have told. We've been renovating a Victorian house built in 1880 out of old-growth redwood and local brick in Grass Valley. It's a diversion, a flashy lure to take our attention off our feelings or process them, perhaps with a resurrection, by saving something worth saving. 2020 was quite a year, but for us, 2019 was much worse. In February of that year, we got a phone call from the police telling us they'd found our 21-year-old son's body on a bench by San Francisco Bay. He had taken his own life. I took the details down with a reporter's detachment, telling my husband with a glance and a small shake of the head what we had ever feared to know. He fell to the floor with a cry so anguished I will never get it out of my head. I spoke to the police several times that week, taking information in my journalist's telephone voice: what caliber bullet, where to find his car, how to get a death certificate, while I almost physically felt myself split in two, one a robot, and one pitched forward into a yawp so endless I might never rise again. We spent the rest of spring curled into the sofa, my Fitbit registering perhaps 500 steps a day. On the third month after Austin's death, we posted a photo to social media of us holding his ashes, what was left of our lives. Through summer and into the fall, the wildfires came. We'd survived the Tubbs and campfires, but the Kincaid chased us from our home. We carried our son's ashes, family papers, and our cats to a relative's house, then home again when danger had passed. But until the rains came back, I did not unload my car, preferring to drive around with Austin's ashes and his teddy bear until I knew they wouldn't be lost. We skipped the winter holidays. We all agreed it was too painful to pretend to celebrate. Instead, we tried to make plans for the new year. We couldn't bear our four walls anymore. With nothing to lose, we bought this decrepit Victorian in Grass Valley and started thinking about making a new life in a new place. We made plans and hired a builder, and then coronavirus hit. Everything shut down, except construction, which was deemed essential. In our little bubble, we tore off the old redwood siding that had curled and warped over the years. We exposed old newspaper from 1927 under asbestos tile, a penny from the first Roosevelt administration, still bright bits of wallpaper hidden under boards, burnt spots from a long ago house fire, divots in the stairs from fallen embers, a square nail. Then another. We researched vintage redwood to replace the old siding, but it was costly or unattainable. Then we found a local craftsman who was salvaging redwood trees, their bark blackened by the Sonoma County fires. He saved the trees from being mulched and instead milled them into beautiful new boards. He hand-milled our home's new siding from fire-hardened redwood that might have stood with the original trees that built our house. Somehow, we have managed to find new life for this rough, empty house from rejected, ravaged trees for a couple of tragedy-hardened people who didn't know how much they needed hope. When I find a square nail, it tells me that others have been here, have crafted their lives in this place, have survived hardships and left their mark behind. Fires and floods and elder care and a pandemic, financial worry and a broken heart. We'll get through them. We'll keep living even when we don't think we can. We pick up square nails and pound shiny new ones and decide where to plant a tree for our boy. Perhaps someone else will sit under it and thank us someday.
As we move to the offering, I offer profound gratitude and thanks for these stories from Susan, detailing her diary from the pandemic, and Ruth telling us that Brian Schwimm is saying we've got 6 years to go, and Jim Bair telling us about his history with polio, which was actually a trip to the past for me too, to remember what kind of challenges this country has faced in the past. And then Julia with his awful story of losing her son, Austin. Thank you all for these remarkable stories, for this tapestry you have woven for us. My encouragement, my condolences, my thanks for your heartfelt sharing.